name is Joslyn Kelly, and this is my story of finding me. So, one thing that I've learned in all of my living, things don't just happen; they happen justly. And as I rethink or think about and reflect on my journey, I like to share my story starting back in 2006. In 2006, um, some great things began to happen. I became a homeowner again that I never thought I'd have the opportunity to get another home. I got to drive one of my dream cars. I bought my first BMW new. And although I wasn't making the money that I wanted to make, I was living a life. I worked downtown Chicago, so I was with the hustle and bustle of everything. And being a mother of a young man gave some challenge because I was living the life, but there was still a lot of responsibilities that I inherited as well. And with that being said, I also met an individual and we hit it off. I kind of had questioned myself whether or not I liked him. And I decided that I was going to make myself like him. And we began to forge this relationship. There were certain things that I helped other people do, but I never could do for myself or never saw the need. I'm a giver, so therefore if I have information, I give. If I have time, I give. If I have money, I give. If someone asks and I have it available to me, I am a giver. I give it. So I gave myself, and I gave myself 100%. We had he was involved with rehabbing houses and had asked for my help. And I said, of course. Gave him information, gave him time. And he said, you sure you don't want to do this? Get in this. So I started to see the checks and I'm like, yeah, I want to get in there. So as we began to build the relationship, other things began to happen. The money was great, but there were certain characteristics that I had not experienced with other men prior to this individual. And I remember telling my son one day, this is what a man does. I called and said I needed XYZ. He was Johnny on the spot and he provided that. And I told my son, that's what a man does. And as I tell this story, I also think of some other things I told my son. And we talked about. As a single mother, I always understood that raising a son was a challenge. I could not teach him how to be a man, but I could teach him the respect that that made good people, that made us who we are. Um, you treat others how you want to be treated, and you do your best at whatever you want to do. And I remember having those conversations with him and focused in on that. He, of course, he being my son, Jalen, I could tell conformed to that. And he looked up to this individual. And the individual also took him in under his wing. So that was cool. Again, a single parent, he didn't have the greatest relationship with his father. Fast forward in the story, as we began to make money in my background, I said, okay, this is good, but we need to diversify these funds. And we need to look at doing some other type of investing, another business, just to make sure that this keeps continuing to prosper. And his response to me, him not being my son, but the individual I was dealing with, was, I've always wanted to own a restaurant. Okay, cool, let's do it. Never wanted to own houses, rehab houses, property management, and saw what it did, so I jumped in because I'm a giver. Never necessarily wanted to own and run a restaurant, but again, I'm a giver. If that's what you want to do, let's do it. So in October of 2007, we began this journey of going into business, taking over an existing restaurant, and doing a pretty doggone good job with it. We were able to implement certain things that had not been done before, utilizing stuff that was already in the restaurant and maybe adding a couple of things and listening to what the customers wanted. And our growth was incredible, to the point by this time I was working for another bank and making pretty decent money. But the demand that was at the restaurant here in Gary and my demand on my job in Chicago was too much. So I had to make a conscious decision, and I prayed over it and I got the direction. It's okay. So making that decision to leave my full-time job to pursue not my dream, but the dream of making this thing successful and making sure we did everything that we needed to do, I never would have imagined the reaction that I got. And my partner basically blew up. He became very angry with me because I left my job, and we began to be distanced. The breakup was heartbreaking. It was not only heartbreaking for me, but it was also heartbreaking for my son. And years later, I never knew how much the impact had on him. Pretty much I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Um, Everything kind of began to roll out of control. And Mother's Day 2009, I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't want to be around my family. I didn't want to be around my son. I didn't want to go to the restaurant. I basically stayed to myself. And that evening, I did something that most people will say is horrible. I attempted to kill myself. I took a number of pills, drank a bottle of wine, and did some pretty crazy things. I remember waking up the next morning like, still here. Uh, Things don't just happen; they happen justly. Going through that challenge and that experience did a couple things for me. It helped me to realize some big things. Resilience. We're going through things. Those things don't make us who we are. We are already who we are. And God has poured in us everything that we need in order to survive. And He has a purpose for us. So every morning that we're given breath, there's a reason why we're giving breath, because there's something greater that we're supposed to be doing. I was also working on my doctorate at the time, and I remember making myself. I didn't want to do anything else. I even called my parents because my son was with my parents that day, and I did divulge to them what I had done, and they didn't know what to do. They did as I asked them, take my son to school, and then they came to check on me. Life went on. Believe it or not, during this time, I was going to see a psychiatrist as well as a psychologist. And I don't think I ever shared with them that whole episode. I just went back to resume life as if everything was okay. But the breaking point was about a week or two later. I had gone out of town to visit my cousin. And when I came back, there were certain things that were said to me by this partner that totally shattered my existence. And I physically attacked him. I physically attacked him to the point where a friend called my parents again and involved them into the situation. And I became angry. And the reason why I became angry was they showed up. But at that time, my state of mind, they didn't attack the partner. They just grabbed me and basically put me in seclusion. They wouldn't let me have car keys. They just took me home and just said, you need to rest, get yourself together. Well, a couple of days after that, going back to work, trying to get back into the rhythm of everything, the partner came to me and told me that he had pressed charges against me. And at that point in time, I totally lost it. I questioned who I was, my intelligence, everything about myself, just the essence of who I was. And I remember reaching out to my therapist at the time, and I couldn't stop crying. And she finally convinced me to come in. And when she convinced me to come in to see her, she was there as well as a psychologist. And I couldn't stop crying. And they tried to get me to calm down. They would not let me leave. They took my car keys. Um, Basically, long story short, they committed me. I had to serve a 72-hour hold in the behavioral unit because I was basically on the verge of a nervous breakdown because I had let a situation overtake everything, the essence of who I was. And during that process, it stripped me of everything, everything. Um, to the point I remember being in the hospital, and my attorney at the time came in to do a power of attorney for the business because they didn't know what or how long that I would be in this situation, in this mind, this frame of mind. And I signed over the power of attorney, and someone I went to high school was actually the nurse on the ward. And he came and he sat down with me and he explained to me, I need for you to stop crying. I need for you to pray, and I need you to focus. Because as long as you're hysterical, you're not going to get out of here. And I'm telling you, you're not crazy. Those different situations encouraged me, and I began to calm down. But I remember when they released me, I felt like literally a zombie because the medication that they had given me was so overwhelming. Didn't cry, couldn't laugh, couldn't react. I was just existing. And once I began to come back to myself, that's not who I was or what I was, and it was crazy. So began to come back to myself, figuring out things. At this point in time, the partnership no longer existed. Basically, we closed the restaurant because of everything that was going on impacted our operations. I couldn't control that because I wasn't myself. Um, we closed the doors. I'm trying to figure out how to reel from this. And what I did not realize at the time, because I was so torn, um, broken, unhealthy, that this directly impacted my child. Never knew to the extent that it impacted my child. During that time, I was encouraged to keep journals, to write down my feelings, write down my thoughts, and things of that nature. And I did that. It came to a point where the business faltered. Some things in my financial life with this house that I was so excited to finally have, things just kept happening. I ended up losing the house. I ended up losing the business. And I came to the decision that I needed some time to rebuild. And I prayed and I came to the decision that this is my time to rebuild. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to start fresh, strip it all away, and get myself together. So I did a little research of where I could go. And during that time, 2009, 2010, we were in the midst of um, the recession. And so one place that I looked was Texas. And Texas had very little impact to the recession. Because of my financial background, I was confident that I could go there and get a decent job and get back on my feet and get things back going. So I actually made the decision to move to Texas. And my mother, I called her up. I said, I need your help. And she's like, what is it? I said, I need for you to go with me to pack my stuff up and let's go. So early one February morning, my mother, all of my clothes, my TV, and an air mattress, we hauled it down and made the long journey to Dallas, Texas, where I began my healing process. And I never knew at that point in time that it was a healing process. I knew very few people. My son stayed behind because my objective was to get there and to create a stable environment and then bring him back. My job at that time was to find a job. So I left here with my truck, my TV, my clothes, some shoes, and the air mattress and $2,000 in my pocket. It took a while to find a job. Always been in the church. Religiously went to church every Sunday. Um, but during this process, I found God first. Found God like I have never found him before. And I remember one day just driving, and I looked over to the side of the highway, and there was this building, this humongous building, and it said the Potter's House. The Potter's House. Sounded familiar, but I couldn't remember what it was. So when I got back home, I researched what the Potter's House, and it was T.D. Jakes. So I'm like, oh, okay, I've read all his books. I've seen the movies. And then as soon as I saw it, the radio started having these commercials about this woman's prayer and event. And I was like, okay, I don't have a job. I'm going. I need to find some reconnection. And when I walked into the building, which is a humongous edifice, humongous, I felt like I was in a small room filled with energy and love. And the size of the room no longer mattered. The prayers that they were emitting were so powerful and so strong and so succinct with my spirit that something woke up. And then that was on a Saturday, and Sunday I came back, and kept going back and kept going back. So during this journey of meditation, trying to figure it all out, I came into a spiritual enlightenment, realizing who I was, whose I was, and began to put the pieces back together of self-belief, knowing who I was, knowing what I was capable of, knowing my value, knowing my worth, and not allowing somebody else to dictate that to me. Always been a hard worker, so wasn't getting the job that like I thought I would get them right off the bat. So I began to do some things that I would normally do. One of the jobs I took on was selling cars, and it was the most humbling and interesting thing that I could have ever done. When it was good, it was good, and when it was bad, it was bad. But I'll tell you this, it all predicated on my state of mind. As long as I was positive and outgoing and on top of things, I was doing a great job. But as soon as I allowed self-doubt to come in, like, I don't know about this, I don't like this, and let the negative talk take over, things began to go down. But as soon as I re-energized myself and stayed on top, things were wonderful. Hindsight, looking back, things don't just happen, they happen justly. Things got to be good. Money wasn't as coming in as well as had it been in the past, but it was good. It was good. It was really good. In terms of me being me and not feeling so stressed and restrained, or whether or not my value depended on what others thought of me, or it didn't matter. Time went on, and of course, there were days when I was like, okay, this is hard because it's 100% commission. I want to do something more. So I was always still looking for additional jobs. I posted for this one particular job, and the recruiter called me. And I remember sitting in the dealership, and she explained who she was. And I said, give me a couple of minutes. Let me go to my car and let me talk to you. And the recruiter was just so encouraging. And she's like, I want to get you in immediately. This manager saw your resume. She wants to talk to you. Great, let's make it happen. I took a day off and actually went for the interview. And I had never had an interview like this in my life. The lady was just so down to earth. She was warm. She was inviting. One of the questions she asked me was, if you could choose any song in the world, what would that song be to describe you? And I chose I Am a Survivor. And we both kind of stopped and looked at each other. And at that point in time, I realized how much I had evolved. Because in fact, I had survived a lot. I had survived losing a business that I didn't necessarily want, but I'm a giver, so I poured my all into it and I owned it. I lost my dream house. I lost a relationship that I thought was lifetime. And then in this rebuilding, I lost the relationship that I had with the closeness with my son because of what I had to do to make myself whole. So there were a lot of losses, but I was still moving forward, which was incredible. So, make a long story short, we wrapped up the interview, and I'm back in the car, and I hadn't told my mother that I had another job interview because I had a whole lot of them, and nothing seemed to shake out. So I stopped saying every time I had a job interview, and I called her and I said, I had a very good interview today. She said, you didn't tell me you had an interview. I said, yeah. I said, but the interview, the process, and the questions she asked were just wonderful, and the energy, and she's amazing. So while I'm telling my mother about the experience, my other line clicks, which is the recruiter. And the recruiter asked, well, how did the interview go? And I said, amazing. And she said, I know. I have an offer for you. She offered me a very decent salary and full benefits. And the best part of it was I was living in Dallas. And when she looked at my resume, she made the statement, are you in Chicago or are you in Dallas? I said, well, I'm in Dallas. She says, not a problem. If you should ever need to go back home, don't worry about taking vacation time. I manage both the Dallas and the Chicago office. So you can just work from home or work in the Chicago office if something should ever come up. Why is she saying this? Things don't just happen, they happen justly. Except